All right, gentlemen, this will serve as part two to the substation and transmission line breaker presentation. Uh, we had discussed before pretty much how you determine what it does and how it works on the surface level, how you can identify how many relays and all that information that's inside of it. And we're going to get into a little bit more depth in this one of some terminology and what you're going to hear as far as other linemen and your dispatchers that you're talking to. And remember, we're going to try to keep this on your level. So at least you're able to see and understand what's going on out there in the world. And a lot of this is going to pertain to safety. Professor V is in the room here with me. So if he breaks in at any time, you can get information from him also. Okay, so first, a breaker operation. Well, what is an operation of a breaker? An operation equals an open and a close. I want you to understand that. So if a breaker opens and stays open, a dispatcher is going to tell you that breaker is open. And if a breaker closes, the dispatcher or anybody that's using the same terminology, somebody in the field, the breaker is going to close. If somebody tells you, well, we had an operation on a breaker, that's an open and a close. How does this kind of affect you in the field? Well, for first, you know that the breaker was on automatic. It was automated. It's doing what it was supposed to do. And secondly, it's kind of like a precursor. Something happened on the system, but we just don't know what happened yet. So dispatchers are very good at letting you know by radio or by phone. We just had a breaker operation out of Singleton Ridge A. Well, there's really nothing you can do about it yet, but it does give you the kind of like a, what would you say, Robbie? A heads up?
Yeah, just a heads up.
Yeah, it just gives you a heads up. Something happened on your system that you might need to respond to. So let's go into depth of really how the breaker works and what it does for you. We'll get some terminology right here. Instantaneous operation. Exactly what it means in instantaneous. The breaker opens and closes very quickly. Remember, an operation is an open and close. The open part of the operation in an electromechanical relay type, that's the old style type, is in 1/2 to 3/4 of a second. So it's pretty quick. The breaker opens real fast. And in a digital, the newer electromagnetic type of breakers and the new digital controls, like you've seen in the Schweitzer, something right here, because this is all digital and it's all run by fiber optics. There's no mechanical mechanism that has to work. These are much faster. Let me go back to the relays. These, a disc has to turn in the this breaker panel. A disc inside has to turn until it makes contact with two mechanical relays. That takes a little bit of time. The digital one is like it says, all digital switching, so it can happen rather quickly. And I have not seen one of these yet come out of a factory that's not fiber optic controlled. So fiber optics is much, much faster and much more reliable. So that'll give you an explanation of the quickness of a digital relay. That happens in 2 to 5 cycles. Well, translated, we know that an electrical cycle is at 60 hertz for the power system. If we're able to have the breaker open in 2 to 5 cycles, so that's 1/30th to 1/14th of a second. So that's very, very quickly. As soon as it has opened, it recloses in the same amount of speed. So it's going to reclose back. You're going to have power back in 1/2 to 3/4 of a second, or the same thing, 2 to 5 cycles, depending on the type of relay that you have. That's instantaneous. Timed operation. The reclosing relay is set to a timed wait before closing. It's specified by an engineer and it's already set. You don't need to have any kind of intervention in that. That was pre-planned a long time ago when the substation was built, and then the feeder added on to it. So if you remember in our picture here of the breaker panel, these electromechanical relays right here, And I want to go back to this real quickly. What you see here, phase A, phase B, phase C, reclosing and ground, all of that is wrapped up in this one little box for the Schweitzer relay. Okay, so I just want to give you that information too. You think, well, is this for A by itself? No. Do I have to have 3 of these or 5 of these? No, it's everything is wrapped up in this one little box for a Schweitzer, whereas electromechanical, I've got a bunch of different equipment going on here. Okay, so back here, remember A, B, and C, reclosing and ground in this situation. The phase relays only open, and the ground only open the breaker out there in the yard. Reclosing closes it back. So if I was to give an example there of a breaker operation, the full operation, phase A recognizes a fault, it immediately opens the breaker, and as soon as the breaker is confirmed open, it's going at the speed of light, the reclosing relay closes it back immediately. That's an instantaneous operation. So let's go back to timed. Timed operation. Reclosing relay is set to a timed wait before closing, specified by an engineer. Let me put this on here. Counts. Closes. All right. So it's actually counting the amount of time it closed on itself. So in essence, what I can do here is I can set, and this is typical in distribution systems. We'll talk a little bit about when we get to the fusing part out there in the field. We'll talk a little bit more in depth of fuse safe and a fuse blowing scheme, but that's a different subject. Is they're going to set up their relays to be first instantaneous and then timed. First instantaneous, then timed. Now I can go as many different routes as I want to. I can have an instantaneous one time. I can have an instantaneous 100 times. It depends on what you want to do as far as your circuit is concerned. The typical and most one used out there in the world is instantaneous open, 2 timed. Again, instantaneous open, 2 timed. After it has completed all of its operations, the reclosing relay will go to lockout. So let's explain lockout. Did I explain it, Robbie?
Yes.
I did? Well, did I explain it in my document? Okay, great. Lockout. Locate out. Lockout. I thought I did. Huh. I said something about human intervention. Here it is. Yeah, it is. I got it. Breaker lockout. The breaker has completed all operations. So like I just previously told you, I've done my 1 instantaneous and 2 timed operations. That's what I had it set for. So I had all operations I and P, instantaneous and time, and will not close without human intervention. Let's put reclose. Without human intervention. So in the big picture of things, guys, we've done all our operations. I's and T's, instantaneous and times, and simply in here is a disk that's turning at a certain speed because of time, and it gets to a point here at the end, and there's actually, you can see it on the disk, there's actually a term that says lockout. Well, when it's at lockout, I'm finished. I'm not going to do any more without some type of human intervention to be able to get power restored. This is a huge safety feature here. So if I want 1 and 2 timed, I know after the second time, as far as my circuit is concerned, there's a fault in my circuit that's just not going away. So let's bounce back a little bit and we'll talk about what makes the breaker operate. Say a squirrel gets up on a transformer and causes a phase to ground fault. Well, it's going to operate instantaneous open and instantaneous close. Our hope is that that squirrel got either burned up or fell to the ground. If that's the case, my breaker just keeps on trucking and it resets itself. Say we have a tree limb or a tree that's leaning over into our line, and I get an instantaneous and a closed. The fault remains, so now I'm going to go to time. I'm going to wait 1, 2, or 3 seconds. It's going to open. It's going to reclose. The limb still remains. It's going to open. It's going to reclose, but the limb turned away. Well, we're still in good shape. Breaker operated a couple times, open, close, but the tree limb's gone now, and I still have power. That's the real main purpose why we have instantaneous and timed targets or timed operations on our breaker. Does that give a good explanation, Robbie? Robbie went away on me. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's to think of it, if every little thing that fell into our line locked the breaker out, we'd be driving back to the substation all the time. And I know during a storm or something's happened where you see the lights go off and come back on, that's a breaker operation. If you see them go on and come back, go off and come back on a couple times, well, you can actually count them. I know the Santee Cooper system is 1 instantaneous and 2 time, so I'm counting on off real quick. Or excuse me, off on real quick. Then all of a sudden off, and it's waiting. I'm counting 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. Then the power comes on. Then the power goes off. I'm thinking 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000. If the power comes back on and stays on, I'm happy. I'm good at the house. If it goes back off, guess what? I'm telling my wife, power's going to be out for a while. That breaker just locked out. So it's going to take some kind of human intervention. When I say human intervention, that's both the dispatcher and the lineman out in the field. The dispatcher would be able to close it via SCADA, or you would be able to close it after you have made some type of repair. Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate you reminding me of that part right there. Yep. Yep. Fantastic. Okay, so we know what instantaneous and timed are. Let's talk a little bit about systems here. Transmission, 99% of the time, is instantaneous only. And Robbie had reminded me, we had met previously, and we're still meeting, to give a little bit of explanation on this. If you remember back when we talked about a distribution feeder circuit and a transmission line, transmission is in a loop system. So if I have a section of line between substation 1 and substation 2 of transmission, on the outbound of transmission 1, there's a transmission breaker. And on the inbound of transmission 2 station, there's a breaker. So anywhere in that section of line, if I have a fault, I want to have it instantaneously open. All right? I want to have it instantaneously open because really, in that line section, I have not lost any substations. There's nothing in between. My loop, transmission stays looped all the time, my loop is still able to keep all the other stations with power. If I have a outbound breaker on station 1 and an inbound on station 2, both of those breakers will open. It's actually, if you want to say it, line isolation automatically. And let me bounce back, not to confuse you here. In underground loops, we were able to backfeed because we had an open point. Transmission's a little bit different. It has the loop, but it uses breakers to be able to open the line section and isolate it automatically, whereas you had to go and isolate line and close an open point. This does it all automatically. All right, well, Robbie had asked me when we were talking about this, well, what's the other 1%? Well, those are typically in situations where you have a transmission line. I'll give an example here. That's very, very long, uh, 20, 30 miles long in this situation, and there are no substations in between. You want to give that, because there's so much exposure of it out there in the world, you want to give that at least one opportunity to have a timed operation on it. So a tree limb falls on it, you get an instantaneous open and close. A tree limb falls away, and it goes to timed operation and closes back. You still got transmission power. So it's rare that you see it, but you've got so much line exposure out there in the world to trees and light and everything like that. You want to give it one timed operation. Now I can guarantee you, 100% of the time, it's one instantaneous, one timed. You're not going to transmission because it's such a high voltage and high amperage. You don't want it to reclose more than once. You don't want to have a timed operation more than once because it's so damaging to the conductor. And typically, when it happens, this is Murphy's Law, it's going to be 3 miles into a swamp. Right, Robbie? Yeah. Yeah. All right. In distribution, you can have a combination of really whatever you want, instantaneous at time. An example, uh, one instantaneous, that's an I, so I put the capital letter, and two timed. That's probably the most prevalent, but you can make your relays any way that you want to. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. All right, on the breaker itself, it has a local and remote switch. Let me go back to that. So we talked pretty much about the relay. Not worried about this section up here yet. We talked pretty much about the relays. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Phase relays, ground relays, reclosing relay. The open and close handle with the lights, green, white, and red. You've got on this side, and it depends, they're labeled for you. We're going to use this side, a local remote, and what they call a tagging relay. Okay? Let's talk about the local remote first. In remote, SCADA has control of the breaker of everything that it does except for one item. That is open. If you have an emergency where you're either there at the substation or for some reason SCADA is down, you're not getting communication to that breaker, you don't have to come in, well, do I need to turn this switch, turn this switch? For safety reasons, you can go straight to the breaker and turn this to open. The green light will come up. All right. Remember, this is not a visual open, but this will take power off the entire circuit. Get back to my Word document. Okay, so that's the local remote switch. In local, you can do anything. You can open and close the tagging relay. You can do pretty much anything you want to. In remote, you can't do anything with this except open the breaker. Okay. Back to the document. In remote, breaker handle will only open breaker for safety. Okay. Oh, one thing to include here. These handles don't move. Right? In remote operation, it's straight up and down. Left, open, right is closed. What will happen is you're going to get two indications here. You're going to get, when you turn close, you're going to get the red light. That'll tell you you're closed. If you open, you're going to get the green light. It's closed. This thing's kind of spring operated. You turn it with some force. Don't be ginger with it. Turn it a little bit. It's going to open, turn a little bit to the other direction. It's going to close, and then it's going to spring back to the middle position. I know it's very hard to see by this video. Well, what happened? One of my lights burn out, and it does. They do, especially the red one, because the red one is supposed to be on all the time. That means we have power. Right above the handle, they have what they call a semaphore. It's a flag that's mechanical. When I turn it to the right, a green flag will come up in here, and when I turn it to the left, a red flag will come up in here also. The more you do this, the more you get in depth, don't you, Robbie? Okay, lockout, we did explain. All right, in local, all breaker functions are available to you. Never close a breaker at your current classification. So if you're there for some reason, say you had to open the breaker because it was emergency, you have all permissions to do that. But you're going to need somebody there with you and actually do the operation of closing a breaker. The reasons are you're going to have required training through OSHA and be classified to do that. So if by chance your boss man calls you up and says, hey man, we're done, you can go ahead and close that breaker. At your current classification as a line technician C, you're going to say, could you please come to the station and do that for me? Or dispatcher's never going to tell you that. Dispatcher's never going to say, well, SCADA's not working, we need you to close that breaker. They're going to get somebody qualified out there to close that breaker for you. That's for safety reasons. All right, hotline work permit, HLWP, also referred to as a one-shot or a hotline tag. So the 4 letters mean hotline work permit. The breaker will only open instantaneously. All right, only. That's all it does. And remember our time here. If we're using electromechanical, 1/3 to 1/2 of a second. If we're using digital, 3 to 5 cycles. The reload closing relay is disabled. Let's bounce back to the picture a little bit. So we said local remote was over here. Reclosing is over here. Simply put, guys, if you need to do this manually, you just need to turn the reclosing relay off. And that is exactly what it does. It turns this relay off. There's no connection anymore. So if I have a fault on A, B, or C, or an overload on ground, the breaker is going to instantaneously open. I don't have a reclosing relay anymore. I turn it off, and so it won't reclose back. It's just going to sit there. This is not, excuse me, this is not breaker lockout. I want you to get your terminology right. The breaker is open with a hotline work permit. That's what you're going to hear from everybody else. If somebody tells you where the breaker is locked out, in your minds you're going to know it went through all of its operations on its own. Anything you need to add there or have an explanation on as far as the pre-closing relay and a hotline work permit, Robbie?
Just a call the hotline tag. That's going to be a situation where decide if you got into anything with it, it'll be that quick. It's there for your protection.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I'll go further on, in the explanation here, but that's a real good, in a nutshell, explanation of what it is for you. Now, hotline work permits are during work. You're going to be working on an overhead line, so they must be used at all times while working on an overhead feeder and tap lines. Now, I've got overhead in bold here. You're going to get a little bit more explanation on that in just a moment. Underground is used at the supervisor's discretion. So let's talk about this for just a moment. Remember, in overhead, you have the potential in a bucket truck to be an exposure or direct contact. Now, when I say direct contact, you got your rubber gloves on, you got your rubber sleeves on, you got the line hosed up and everything like that, but you're in very, very close proximity to live conductors. And with your rubber gloves on, you're going to have to grab conductors and move conductors. So you're very, very close to it. So the potential for damage is high. Underground is all stick work. and everything in underground that you do work, I'll just go throw this out there. You cannot work in a live front underground transformer or a live front. What do I mean by live front? You have live exposed conductors in there. There are still some of those out there in the world. You can't go in there standing on the ground with rubber gloves and do work. That is not allowed. But you can move insulated, that's dead front, underground conductors and wires in a transformer. That is allowed with a stick. So now that you've got distance and you're using a stick and you're moving insulated conductors around, it's at the discretion of the supervisor whether you want to use it or not. At all means, you see a situation where the supervisor typically does not get a hotline work permit while they're moving underground primary conductors, and you see a situation, well, this thing's full of grass, ants, and the cable doesn't look that good at all. Can we get a hotline work permit? By all means, do it. Request it and get it taken care of. Okay. Breaker lockout was explained. Completed all operations. This is the automated side of it. Won't reclose without human intervention. Once again, that's going to be the dispatchers or a supervisor, not you. You can't do that because you're not qualified for it now. So we were discussing the document, how we were coming down through doing all this stuff with the breaker and whatnot. And Robbie recommended, this is a great idea here. Well, what's the procedure? What do I need to do out there in the world? Firstly, a typical line crew that goes out there and does work, either the supervisor or the lead lineman is going to request a hotline work permit. Due to safety reasons, and depending on who's there on the job, you, as a beginning lineman, can get a hotline work permit. The great examples would be, well, I'm on a service truck, the guy's up, it's just two of you, the guy goes up in the bucket, and he shouts down, I need a hotline work permit. Well, you're going to have the guy that does it. He doesn't have a radio with him. You're the guy that's going to have to request it from your dispatcher. And that's all fine and dandy because that's safety for both you and him. So what's the procedure? Contact dispatch and request a hotline work permit for the circuit you are on. How do I identify the circuit? Use the pole number. If you're standing at the pole that you're working on, relay that information to the dispatcher. I'm at pole number 12345. That'll identify the circuit as far as his maps are concerned and follow and confirm the dispatcher instructions. Well, you pretty much say, and I can do it with Robbie here, Robbie, I'd like to get a hotline work permit on pole number 12345 circuit.
You want a hotline tag for the circuit at pole number 1234.
That is correct.
Stand by. Let me verify this information, and I'll get right back to you.
Standing by.
All right, Scott, at this time I've verified that I've placed a hotline tag on the circuit that you're working on at pole 1234, and you may
Okay.
with your work.
All right. I understand I have a hotline work permit on the circuit on pole 12345, and I can continue work.
That is correct.
That's it, guys. That's it in a nutshell. Now, now from this point on, you just shout up to your lineman, you've got a hotline work permit now. Well, what does a hotline work permit entail? If by chance you have a fault for any reason on that circuit, including the lineman, or say he just shorts a wire out, that breaker's going to open instantaneously and not reclose. All right. Hotline work permit procedure without SCADA. Okay. If you guys, when I put this document out, if you want to just click that link there, that'll show you what the SCADA stands for. All right. At the current level that you guys go into a company, you're not able to get one without SCADA. Okay. You do not have permission at this time to go to a substation, put it in low. Excuse me, turn the reclose and relay off, and then start your work. It requires training and classification to be able to do that. A lot of things when you do this by SCADA are happening in the background. A lot of automated things that are going on with the breaker that you guys at this time just don't know. All right, you will learn within the company, and the company needs to train you internal and recording. So you go and you're a serviceman with an A-line technician, and he goes up and starts his work. You call the dispatchers up, and they call you back. SCADA is not in operation at this time. What do? Do not work on the circuit until a hotline work permit is obtained. All right, just don't answer back on the radio. This is a dead giveaway here. Well, thank you very much. We'll just continue with work. Well, they're thinking, that guy's taking a chance there because, just because SCADA is down. Don't do that. You and the A-Tech line technician go to the station. Now, it's good you stand beside him and learn. He's going to have to do this in the substation at the breaker panel. Then you ride back out and do your work. Or go find something else to do. Get an estimate of when SCADA is going to be back up, and then come back to that job when you've got SCADA back. Okay? On the breaker panel, we'll go in that in just a moment and get this done. I do want to run back for just a moment. When you've got the hotline work permit and you got it via SCADA, you are responsible for the communications should the breaker open. Well, it's kind of a thing there that, I didn't mind it as far as the operations of me and Santee Cooper, because I know who was working with who. That if I've got a line technician C that's been working there for, say, 30 days, and he's working with one of my A-line techs, I hear him call up, I need a hotline work permit, I'm all fine with it. I'm happy with it, and he is definitely allowed to do that. What's going to hurt here is remember, when you get a hotline work permit on a circuit, it's for the entire circuit. You might be working at one location, and 2 miles away, a bird flew into the line and contacted a crossarm. It's going to do the same thing. The breaker's going to do what it's intended to do. It's going to open and not reclose. So what the dispatcher is going to do, of course, they're going to get a little bit worried. I do every single time. And I'll use I'll use Robbie, for example. You're the dispatcher here. Call me when the breaker opens.
At this time, Scott, we have a 345. Is everything okay at your location? Scott?
All right, you get the gist here, gentlemen. He's calling me, and I could tell you one thing. I'm listening also as far as another supervisor somewhere else or an area supervisor. My heart's starting to pound a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah, because I'm thinking the breaker's locked out. I've got two guys working together. One of them's hurt because they're not communicating. They're not close to the radio to listen for the breaker lockout situation. And it hasn't even happened at your location. So Robbie's going to go ahead and start that conversation again with the proper way. Go ahead, Robbie.
Dispatch, Scott.
This is Scott. Go ahead.
Hey, Scott, we've got a lockout on the breaker on the circuit that you're working at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is everything okay at your location?
Robbie, we didn't see anything here. Didn't see anything on the line. I've got my men and equipment. We are in the clear, and we're ready for you to close that breaker back.
Okay. Equipment in the clear, and you're ready for me to re-energize that circuit?
That is correct.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I've got current on the
I understand you have the breaker reclosed, and you do show current on the circuit. Okay, Robbie, just to confirm, do I still have my hotline work permit?
Do you need to continue with your hotline work permit?
I do.
Yes, you still do have your hotline work permit. Continue with your work.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, guys, you see the importance of being in communication with your dispatcher. And well, I know you're out there saying, well, geez, Professor V and Professor S, you guys have done this thousands of times. The dispatchers are great guys. They will talk your way through it. They will help you out um, with your terminology and what you need to do. But the worst case scenario there is not being in communication at all. If you go out of communication for any reason, uh, the hairs on your neck start raising up, and we start getting worried about the situation. And typically, if you come back from the day and the dispatcher tells me, well, it took me about 7 minutes to get a hold of Scott because he wouldn't answer the radio, we're going to have a little bit of talk in training, discussion. It's not going to be anything corrective about the importance of communication in this situation. And about 1,000 customers were out for 7 minutes when they could have been back on in about 30 seconds. Okay. All right, Robbie. One last step right here. I think I've touched on it before, but it's in my notes. On the breaker panel, you can identify a hotline work permit when reclosing relay is off with a red flag. That's an OSHA requirement. So we'll go back to the picture again. All right. What's going to happen here, and this actually happens with motors inside. When I have SCADA, and I call SCADA and I say I need a hotline work permit on this circuit, remember, it turns off the reclosing relay. A little motor behind the handle here turns it to the left. A red flag will come up. They've actually got a red light right here that lights up, and it will actually turn it off. So that happens there, and that's a requirement. This is going to show to the off position. This is going to be lit up. Right when SCADA, if I call SCADA and tell them, well, I need to give up my hotline work permit, a little motor in here turns it back on. This light goes out. So that was that's an OSHA requirement. You need to have something visual on your breaker to show that you have the reclosing relay turned off. Can you do it as far as manually? No. But it is a good thing to see that if you walked in, and I'll give an example here to wrap it up. If you walk into the substation and you see the reclosing relay, well, is it off or on? I know if it's in non-automatic or not. I know if it's one shot or hotline work permitted. Lastly, the example here, and you might run into this for a dispatcher's confirmation. This has happened before, more than once, is I go through the course of the day and I'm going to work all day long at a location where I need a hotline work permit. So I'm working from 7 to 3:30, and guess what happens at 3:20? I finish my work and I drive in, and I forgot to cancel my hotline work permit. You got to give it up. You got to return it back to normal if you're finished with your work. Not to say anything bad about contractors, but new contractors on your system sometimes make this error. So he went home at 3:30. All right, the dispatcher should catch it. He should see it. And what he'll do is after 3:30, if he's got your working hours, he's going to give you a call up. He's going to say, Robbie, do you still have need your hotline work permit on the circuit 1, 2, 3, 4?
I'm ready to give up that hotline. We've got all men tools and equipment.
Okay. And they're just going to go through the normal procedure. Well, it's back in automatic. Closing relay is turned back on, and the rest of that conversation is going to go. What hurts is if I call Robbie and he doesn't answer, right? Yeah. Doesn't answer his radio, doesn't answer his cell phone. This thing's going to start cruising through the night in non-reclosing. So typically, what's going to happen is the dispatcher is going to call somebody else up. It's going to have to go out here and look at the circuit, get with the crew. It's just a lot of hassle. Now, even with that, sometimes dispatchers are not infallible. I've seen this non-reclosed sit on a breaker for days, and all of a sudden you've got a thunderstorm that runs through, one light strike, and this breaker is going to open. Well, the dispatcher is going to call you up. Yeah, we had an operation on the breaker, but it never reclosed. So what you'll have to do is go to the station and confirm for the dispatchers, yep, reclosing relay has been on the whole time. Could you go ahead and place that back in automatic and reclose the breaker? So it just gives you some of the scenarios that can go on in those situations. I think the most vital of these in discussing what we've discussed today is communication. Yeah, at all times. Even if you have a question of the dispatcher and it wants to get lengthy, tell him, hey, could you give me a call by phone? He'll talk you through it, or can I give you a call? And you guys can discuss it. Don't do anything out there in the world where you think you might be taking a shortcut or doing anything wrong without having good communication. The other part is stay in communication. Just don't get your hotline work permit and go to work and leave the radio sitting in the truck. You've got to have a radio on. All right, Robbie, I think that pretty much wraps it up. If you guys go through these notes and watch the videos, you can see where I've got tons of quiz questions where I can put in there, both on the safety side and the regular operations side. So prepare yourselves, gentlemen. And if there's nothing else from you, Robbie, I'm going to wrap this up. All right, thank you very much. You guys definitely have a good day and appreciate all your hard work.